Well, good morning. Good morning. Good to see all of you here. Those of you who are joining us online, really good to see you. Hey, before I jump into the message, just a really quick announcement here from me. We are going to be taking a group to Greece over the Thanksgiving break holiday there. And so if you would like to go to Greece, it doesn't matter where you are in the United States or wherever you are watching this, you're welcome to join us. Open to anyone. We're actually going to be studying through the letters of Paul the Apostle. So we're going to look at some of the places that he went, the letters that he wrote. I mean, this is a guy who wrote half the New Testament, and he's probably shaped Christianity for us, even, I hate to say this, even more so sometimes than Jesus, because we always look to Paul and how he applied the teachings of Jesus. And so if you're interested in that, just see me. You can see me at Connecting Point afterwards. Love to give you more information. Now, we are finishing this series. We've got this week and next week where we're going to be finishing this series called Identity Theft, where we talk about, occurrences, situations in life, things that happen in life that have a tendency to steal our identity. And what I mean by that, they change how we think of ourselves, how we see God, how we see others, how we try to get others to see us. I mean, again, who we are, why we're here, what's our purpose, these things impact that a lot. We've talked about appetites. We've talked about how if we don't control our appetites will control us. And you know people that when you see them, you think of their appetite, whether it's an addiction where the appetite has really gotten a hold of them, or whether it's just a behavior pattern where they're constantly feeding, some type of lust or desire or whatever it may be. It becomes their identity. And so we've talked about pain, things in the past. Things that something that somebody has done to us that begins to shape us and change us. We've talked about things that we've done, our own mistakes and our own reputation. But today I want to talk about something a little different. I want to talk about circumstances. How circumstances can change us. Now, there's a story, I was actually looking online about these switched at birth stories. I don't know if you've seen or read any of those, but there was one that popped out when I was kind of doing a little search on that as an illustration. It was a Japanese guy who was actually born as a prince. He was born to a wealthy kind of, some type of royal connection family. But in the hospital, he was switched with a boy that was born the same time, same day, who was from a very poor family. And this is a true story. You can kind of Google this and look it up. And so here, the prince has been raised among, with a family in dire poverty. Meanwhile, the kid who was born in poverty was raised, among royalty. And it talks about how different their lives were and how it all came out much later because of some health situations that caused some DNA testing and blood testing and all that. And so it came out much later. And the guy actually, had kind of this lawsuit against the hospital and everything and won the case. But still, imagine how different his life was being born royalty and yet growing up in poverty. That was just a situation, a circumstance. He didn't ask for it. It was just kind of thrust upon him. Or think about the identity of the guy who was poor and now is part of kind of the royal family and the background that he would have gotten from that, education and opportunity. That's what circumstances will do. They'll change us. And some of you are facing situations and circumstances you didn't ask for. You were born into it. Or some of you, it was thrust upon you by someone else. Or it just the world we live in, whether it's an economic downturn, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's some other type of global calamity or something that's happening, it just happened to you. Maybe it was at your job, they downsized, or your business didn't survive the pandemic, and now that's put you in a tailspin. But our situations and our circumstances, they can change us. They can steal the identity of who God created us to be, who He's called us to be, what He has for our life, and we can get stuck in those situations and circumstances where it redefines us. And it redefines how we see the world, how the world sees us, how we see God, how we conduct ourselves, how we project ourselves, all of that. See, your identity is stolen when what you're going through gets the best of you. Now, you know that phrase, right? Get the best of you. When you say somebody got the best of me, it means that they defeated you or they one-upped you or somehow they overcame you, right? And you've heard that. And some of you have gone through like some bitter relationships, right? Or maybe you went through a really, really ugly divorce and it brought out this ugly side of you and you say, it got the best of me, right? Or maybe there was a time where you were just really scared financially. And you began to lash out at your family, and because of the panic and everything else that was sitting in your heart, you were taking it out on a lot of people. It got the best of you. When what you're going through gets the best of you, that's when your identity is stolen. And if you stay there, it will actually shape your identity. You will become defined by situations or circumstances that are completely out of your control. Now, we talk about the enemy, Satan, who wants to steal, kill, and destroy. You know, the enemy of our soul, the enemy, capital E enemy, who wants to steal, kill, and destroy. And sometimes he will do that by leveraging circumstances that we find ourselves in. And other people in our life, they will characterize us by the circumstances if we let them. In other words, you may have been born into a poor family and people will just keep you in that poverty mentality if you let them. That poverty mentality. In fact, sometimes we react differently, like the pendulum will swing the other way. You may have grown up poor. And so now you do everything you can to project success, from the car you drive, the house you buy, the clothes you wear, and everything else, and how you spend money. Some of you may be old enough to relate to this, and others of you at least you can relate through family members or stories. But there was that generation through the Depression or World War II, the post-World War II, when things were so tight, and they became hoarders. Right? Nobody, nudge anybody, don't point, But you became hoarder because it's like, I grew up not having anything or not having much, and so therefore I hold on to everything. We wash plastic forks, right, and keep them because we may need them. We wash paper plates or the foam plates because we may need them, right? And people like this, and you say, why is that? How is it that they're like that? It's a circumstance or a situation that could have been momentary, but for them, it shaped them, it defined you, and you're stuck. Well, we've been looking at the story of Jacob in the Old Testament. Now, Jacob's story starts about Genesis 25 through 50. But today, I want to shift a little, and I want us to talk about the story of Joseph. The story of Joseph. This is Jacob's son, his 11th son. So for those of you who have heard about the 12 tribes of Israel, those 12 tribes, were really 12 different family members, but they all had their roots to Jacob. Jacob is the father of 12 sons, and those 12 sons and their families and their descendants became the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob is number 11, okay, out of the 12 sons. He's Jacob's 11th son, but it's Rachel, his mom's first son. Little backstory, Jacob fell in love with Rachel. And Rachel's the one that he wanted to marry. But Rachel had an older sister, Leah, who was not married. And the tradition and the custom is you can't marry off the younger girl until you get the older one married. And so when Jacob goes to get married to what he thinks is Rachel, father-in-law does a switcheroo. And there at the altar, I'm assuming she wore a veil because it'd be kind of obvious otherwise. And in that Middle Eastern culture, it would have been common that she's wearing a veil, and probably the only thing you see, if anything, are her eyes, right? Which is interesting because they say that Leah had soft eyes or weak eyes. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means she was cross-eyed or what. But I guarantee you, once he saw those eyes, he's probably like, wrong chick, right? And he doesn't find out he's married the wrong chick until after they've consummated, right? After honeymoon night. And you go, how in the world could that be? Well, if she wore the veil the whole time, and some other strange customs that they do, which we won't get into. Listen, at that point, he's like, oh my goodness, I've married the wrong chick. And so he says, I wanted to marry Rachel, but now I'm stuck with Leah. And that's pretty much how the story starts out, stuck with Leah. And so Rachel is the one he loves, Leah, the one he has. He eventually is married to both of them. And then, of course, they have maidservants, and the whole story just goes really wacky. We'll get into that. But it's an extension. Joseph's story is really an extension of Jacob's story and the fulfillment of God's promises to Jacob. And it's Jacob's identity that we're talking about, but his identity sometimes gets wrapped up in his family members, okay? Now, Rachel, the one that he loved, was infertile. She could not have kids. She was barren. And just imagine what that does to a woman. Infertility got the best of Rachel. Infertility, the inability. Now, at that time, women, they weren't valued very much except for the fact that they could have children. And so she can't have any children. And I know, listen, I have talked to women and had friends that they're not able to have children. And it messes with your worth and your value and who you are. And especially if you have a longing to be a mother and to have kids. And it's just, God created me to be a mom, and I can't have kids. And this situation, this circumstance that I didn't ask for, that is out of my control, is changing who I am created and destined to be. And I've talked to women, and they've said, listen, I know that I can adopt, and I know there's other ways, but it messes with me. And then there's the husbands who say, I wish I could fix it, but I can't fix it. There's nothing I can do. And it's changing them, right? The situation and the circumstance is redefining who they are. Here's what it looked like in Rachel's life. In Genesis chapter 30, it says, when Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister because Leah was having kids. Leah had 4 kids. She had 4 sons, right? So she said to Jacob, give me children or I'll die, right? I have no reason to live. I have no purpose in life if I can't have kids. And this is messing with her. Goes on, it says, Jacob became angry. And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Anger is usually a sign of pain. I imagine he's hurting for his wife. This is the love of his life. He probably wants to have children with her. He would love to have an heir through her. And it's coming out as anger because why? He can't control it. He can't fix it. And he says, am I in the place of God who's kept you from having children? Okay, now God's getting dragged into it. This changes how I see you, how you see me, how we see ourselves, how we see your sister, right? Because there's jealousy there. It's changing how we relate and see God. This circumstance and this situation that we have no control over, that we didn't ask or invite, is changing everything. It's changing us. Well, she comes up with a solution. It's kind of a crazy one, but then she said, here is Bella, my maidservant. Sleep with her so that she can bear children for me and that through her I too can build a family. And so when we see maidservant or manservant in slavery, we always think of, the Civil War type slavery or, the barbaric world where you would capture people and drag them back. But a lot of the slavery we see, especially at this point, you've got to remember Abraham, father Abraham, Isaac, father of Jacob, and then Jacob, they're wealthy people. They have lots of livestock, they have lots of animals, they have lots of servants. And the servants that they're talking about are not necessarily slaves that were captured and drugged back into captivity. It was people who were born in dire poverty. They could not, fend for themselves. They didn't have wealthy families. They didn't have livestock. So they would tend the livestock of the wealthy, right? And the wealthy people would provide them shelter and provide them food and provide them clothing and provide everything. They're indentured servants, but slaves nonetheless because they don't have anything of their own and they can't just go off by themselves. And so you got this maidservant. What does her situation say about her? What is her circumstance saying about her? And how belittling is it that this man who now owns me, right, that I am indebted to, can sleep with me, I'll have a child, and then I give that child up, not as a foster child, but to be adopted and raised by another woman. And the circumstance and the situation is dire for the servant. So think about it. Leah, who was not loved, but she has 4 children, right? So Jacob didn't want her. She just happens to be the older sister. So she's stuck. Her identity is loveless. Rachel's identity is childless. Leah, when she has her sons, the first 3, she actually names them after her new identity. When she's naming the kids, like the first one, she names Mercy. And she says, God has seen that I'm not loved and had mercy on me. So that name was a reminder that she's not loved. She is naming her children out of her broken identity. Third one comes along and it's attachment or attached, right? Surely this child will have my husband attached to me. God saw that I'm not loved and he gave me a child that maybe my husband will now attach to me. And then the 4th child comes along, she names him Judah. And it's the 4th child that she finally kind of breaks from that and just says, I will praise the Lord. I got 4 children, praise God. Right? But her identity is loveless. And Rachel is childless. And the stolen identity of these 2 women starts a birthing competition like you have never seen because, hey, Rachel, now she's got this servant who had a child. It is great. And then there's another child that comes. And then Leah goes, well, wait a second. I haven't had any of my own, but I've got a servant. So here's my maidservant. So Jacob sleep with my maidservant. So you got 2 wives and you got 2 maidservants. And they start bartering back and forth of who gets to sleep with Jacob on what night. One of the kids, Jacob's kids, goes out and gets some fruit, comes home. Mom says, oh, let's give that fruit to them and swap nights. So Jacob comes home and she says, hey, I bought you tonight. It is weird, man. It is like messed up. Right? It is the Real Housewives of Haran right here. This is where it's crazy. Right? And it's all because of their broken identity. Starts this whole competitive thing among all the women in the story. And what about those servant girls? I mean, we never really think of the minor characters in the background of these stories, and we never think of the minor character in the background of our stories either. But these servant women are just birthing babies, and what does it say to them? How do you think they felt? How do you think they related to God? Here we are, our master has been chosen by God. What about us? We seem to just be used as birthing machines. And then the story switches in Genesis 37 to Joseph. But really, it's an account of Jacob. Because here's what it says. This is the account, or in some translations, this is about the generations of Jacob, or this is the legacy of Jacob. In other words, God started something here in Abraham, then to Isaac, now to Jacob, and this is how the story is going to continue. But it's about Jacob, even though we're going to start talking about Joseph. It goes on, it says, Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending flocks with his brothers, really half-brothers. Remember, he's number 11. The other 10 are all from either, his aunt or from all the servant ladies. So he's out tending flocks with his half-brothers. And he brought their father a bad report. So Joseph, the 17-year-old tattletale, goes back home and says, the guys are cutting up and whatever. Goes on, it says, now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and because he was also Rachel's child. But it says, and he made a richly ornamented robe for him. The coat of many colors, as the Broadway musical says, right? We don't know if it was many colors. We just know it was very ornamented. But look at this. Jacob is following in the bad example of his father who picked favorites. Because Jacob had a twin brother, Esau. So, it was Jacob and Esau. And Esau was born first, and Esau was the outdoorsman and the hunter and the man's man. And Jacob was the one who was learning interior design and staying in the tent or whatever it was, right? And so Jacob loved Esau, but yet, his other son, Isaac loved Esau, but Jacob was like the mama's boy. How did that feel? What does that situation and circumstance say to Jacob? And yet Jacob is doing the same thing. He's picking favorites and at least letting it be known. Okay, parents, if you have a favorite, don't let it be known. You don't go out and give them ornamented robes, right? But here's the thing. Joseph is destined by God to be an important player in the role of what God is going to do. But this ornamented robe is not just because a father loves a son and gave him a great gift. This meant something. This is like putting the mantle of leadership upon his son. This is Jacob saying to all of his kids, that's the heir. Forget the birthright. See, that birthright where the first kid gets like double everybody else, gets in charge of the family, the blessings of God flow through the father to the kid of the birthright. Listen, Jacob and Esau, they disrupted that. Jacob was second and he stole or deceitfully got the birthright. And now Jacob is saying, yeah, I'm not going to honor it in my family either. Joseph's going to be the one to rule this family. So how do you imagine that makes all the other ones feel? Here's the firstborn that's been passed over, and here's the next 9 passed over. For this 17-year-old kid who's a tattletale and who's dad's favorite and gets all this preferential treatment. And so Joseph one day is sent out to go check on his brothers again, and they see him coming, and they said, here comes this dreamer, because Joseph had a dream. He had a couple of dreams. And in his dreams, he basically, as it was interpreted or as they understood it, it was basically his brothers bowing down to him one day. Second dream, it was not just his brothers, it was actually his brothers and his mother and father. And that's how they interpreted these dreams, that Joseph was going to be in charge, that God was somehow going to elevate him. And listen, it made the brothers jealous, and it even somewhat upset his mother and father to say, even that we're supposed to serve you and bow down? And so he's telling these stories and telling these dreams. And so when they see him coming, they said, here comes that dreamer. And they decide they're going to kill him. So his brothers, his family, his half-brothers, throw him into an empty cistern. A cistern is not like a well that's in the ground. If you ever go to the Middle East, you'll see that these are like caves that are carved into the side of the mountain. So when water runs over these kind of rocky mountains, it rolls into the cave and it feels like a swimming pool. This one happens to be empty. They throw him in this cave, in this cistern. They're blocking the entrance. And this boy, 17 years old, however old he is listening to his brothers plot to kill him and tell the story to his dad that somehow he died from animals. What does that do to you and your identity and your worth? How do you see yourself and see God and see everyone else when your own family members are plotting to kill you? And one of them says, well, let's not kill him. Let's make some money off of him. So here comes the caravan, right? They're coming across, the traders. And so they said, let's just sell him into slavery. And it says the Midianites are coming. But then it gets, Midian's a whole region, an area, right? That's a place in the land of Midian. But it's not just Midianites from a location. They're Ishmaelites. Now, what does that mean? Well, you had Father Abraham. He had Isaac and Ishmael. Isaac's the one that had Jacob. Jacob's now his sons. These are cousins. Guys, these are distant cousins that they are selling their brother to. What does it do to how you see yourself and your place in the world when your brothers want to kill you and instead they sell you to cousins and no one objects? How worthless are you? So they sell him. The Ishmaelites, the cousins, take him off to Egypt and then sell him again, right? Flip this son is what it was. Whatever, flip this boy. And they do. They sell him into slavery. And they sell him to Egyptians who will change his name. They will change his appearance. They will have him change his language. They will make him as un-Hebrew as they can and turn him into an Egyptian as much as they can and force them into a culture. Imagine that you were taken to a country where you do not know the language, do not know the culture, and they change everything about you, and by the way, you're their slave. Not slave because you're poor, but slave because you were captured. What does that do? I mean, come on. We know some people who were like prisoners of war and how it messes with them. And so this is what's going on with Joseph. And then they led their father to believe that an animal had killed him. They take that ornamented robe, they put animal blood on it, and they rip it and tear it up, take it back to the father and say, hey, is this his robe? I'm like playing stupid, right? Is this his robe? And he's like, oh my goodness, animals have killed my son. And he goes into mourning where he really wants to die. He makes the comment, I want to go to him, right? He's ready to die. Look, these circumstances conflict with everything that God had promised Jacob. God said, hey, Jacob, I'm promising you that I'm going to be with you and I'm going to bless you and I'm going to take care of you and I'm going to protect you. But these circumstances conflicted with every promise of God because he wasn't being protected. He was very vulnerable. And so you can imagine if you're Joseph in these situations, you're probably now just not only questioning yourself and all the family, you're questioning God. Your identity is being ripped apart. So in Egypt, he gets bought by Potiphar, an official of Pharaoh himself, one of Pharaoh's officials. So he is now Potiphar's property. Potiphar's property. Property. How dehumanizing is it to just be called property, to be listed with the household assets, right? That's his ID. My identification is I'm someone's property. Hey, who are you? I'm Potiphar's slave, because they don't care about your name. I'm just a piece of property. Some of you probably feel that way at work, right? Who are you? I'm employee number, blah, 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 blah. Some, if you've ever been to prison or been to jail, sometimes there's people who might be able to watch this and see it, or you've got now, hey, who are you? I'm a number. Some of you feel that way in your business world, right? You try to call somebody in your customer service and they go, what's your number? You're just a number. Some of you have been in a hospital and you felt like you were treated as a number, right? It's just dehumanizing. I mean, it just takes all of your identity away. And Joseph becomes a minor character in Potiphar's story because Potiphar's the official and Joseph's just the slave. And you would think, man, everything about the circumstance and the situation, it just screams that God has left this boy. And so the writer of Genesis, when recording the story, reminds us in Genesis 39:2, here's what he says. The Lord was with Joseph and he prospered. And he lived in the house of the Egyptian master, not out in the fields, not out in the tents, not out in the slave quarters, like we know that's what they would do in Egyptian history. You know, we can see archaeology, how they did that. No, he gets to live in the house because the Lord is with him. It goes on, it says, when Potiphar saw the Lord was with him, and the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. It goes on, it says, Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. Now, I don't know if this polytheistic Egyptian guy who worshiped all kinds of weird gods with animal heads, okay? I don't know if this guy said, oh, this is Jehovah God who is, working in this boy's life. But this guy was able to say, this kid has a divine touch. There's something special about him. No matter if I try to make him a slave and just make him a number, and if I just take him down to the best, so he just blends in and has no identity, he still stands out. No matter how much I try to just make him blend in to all the Egyptian culture, giving him a new name, giving him a new language, new look, and everything else, he still stands out. There's something divine on this kid, and it seems like everything he does prospers. And so he can be trusted. And he puts him in charge of everything. And you think, wow, so great. Joseph is now getting some of his identity. It's no longer I'm Potiphar's slave. I'm now the caretaker of Potiphar's house, everything. And you think, wow, he's starting to work his way back, get his identity back. But Potiphar's wife has an eye for Joseph. He's obviously a good-looking guy, and she likes looking at him. And she tries to entice him to go to bed with her. And she says several times, come sleep with me. And he's like, listen, I can't do this. Your husband has entrusted me with everything. But that's not it. It wasn't because he respected his boss. It was because he didn't want to do this to God. He said, how can I do this to him and to God? You see, it gives us a hint. His identity was still found in his relationship with God. His identity was still being found in his faith with God. That even when the circumstances around him looked like God had abandoned him, he still gives us a little glimpse and a little hint that his devotion to God is what is shaping him and is what is, dictating his behaviors and how he responds. That's where his identity was coming from. But for Potiphar's wife, he was nothing but sexual prey. Now, some of you ladies have probably been in that situation. Some of you men too. Where you have just been preyed upon by others. That you just fed the sexual appetite of others. And maybe they've said things or done things, or maybe they even used you. Maybe they promised you love and you thought that it was going to be this lifelong relationship, and all they did was have sex with you and then dump you. You were their plaything. You were their toy. Now, others of you, guys, you wish you were somebody's sexual prey, right? You just wish somebody saw you like that. And the reason I say that is because, listen, I've seen whenever somebody is attracted to someone else, I see the one on the other end change. As a youth pastor, I would see some very conservative, young ladies who were very, modest in their appearance, and, they grew up, and then they go off to college, and somebody recognizes them and their physique, and suddenly everything about them changes. The way they dress changes, the way they take care of their body, the way they present themselves, what they show. I mean, it all becomes more enticing and more revealing. And listen, I'm not trying to, blame ladies for the way they dress and all that kind of stuff. I've seen guys do it too. Come on. You're middle age, and suddenly you got like a sports car and a gym membership. Right? Because you're just working it out. Right? And whenever somebody starts to flirt with you at the office, you start changing the way you dress. Because your sexual prey, it becomes your identity, and now you want to be the one to flaunt it. You want to be the one to entice. You want people looking at you and making the comments, right? You want to show off the goodies. Come on, how many stories have we seen just in Hollywood of the young lady who grew up in a church loving Jesus and singing on the praise team, and the next thing you know, she's posing in Playboy? What happened there? Or the young lady, such a good Christian background, wholesome thing, wholesome TV show. Next thing you know, she is the goddess of sexual immorality. What happened there? She became sexual prey for mass media and for all of us that consume it. And it changed her. And it changes him. And their identity is now wrapped up in all of their sexuality. See, Joseph had this opportunity for an affair. To be objectified, right? Just to be the object of someone's lust. Again, dehumanizing. Demoralizing, because you do. You just take all of your morals and put them to the side. And so identification can be wrapped up in appealing to someone else's appetites. He declined. He declined out of his devotion to God, not out of fear of getting caught. Now, I know of some guys. I know of some guys who gave in to Potiphar's wife. And then whenever you confront them about it and talk to them about it, here's what they will say. Well, I'm just a man. Any other man in my position would have done the same thing. You don't realize how much your identity is stolen. Because not every man would have done that. Not the one whose identity is in God. The one whose identity is shaped by what God says and God thinks and what God has said. Listen, They don't give in to just everything. And so Joseph, his identity was found in God, and he wasn't going to let his identity be shaped by the lustful appetites of this woman. Everybody doesn't do it. Just those who are trying to find themselves, search for themselves, redefine themselves. Well, because he runs out of the room and she's holding his coat, she now is embarrassed and scorned. So what does she do? She just cries, rape. He tried to rape me. And look, I've got the evidence. I've still got the coat that he left in the bedroom. Potiphar comes in and he does something merciful. He throws him in prison. And so now he's the prisoner. That was merciful because he's the master and he could have killed the slave. It was his property. Do with it what you want, right? But I bet Potiphar's thinking, this is so out of character for him. This is not the young man that I've seen the touch of some divine on him. This is not who he is. This is a false identity. Maybe he saw something and said, this doesn't add up. So I just throw him in prison. And while he's in prison, he sits there, again, now just a number, just taking up cell space. He meets a couple of guys who actually used to work with Pharaoh. One of them was the baker, makes all of his bread, and the other one's a cupbearer. He's the one that drinks out of the king's cup to make sure nobody's trying to assassinate him by poisoning his food or his drink. And so he meets these guys, and they have some dreams that they can't understand, and Joseph is able to interpret those dreams. I mean, he's able to say, hey, here's what he said, don't dreams belong to God? I mean, it's not that I have a supernatural power, but I've had some dreams before, and it feels like God was speaking to me. Don't dreams belong to God? Let's just see if these dreams belong to God. Let's just go to God and see if these dreams mean something. Now, not every dream belongs to God. Some of them belongs to Papa Pizza because you ate it too late and you had a weird dream, right? But sometimes God will speak to us through our dreams, right? And so he begins to interpret the dream, and he says to the cupbearer, hey, you got a great dream. This is wonderful. This means that the Pharaoh is going to restore you in a few days. And the baker's over there going, whoa, what about me? What about me? And he says, I hate to tell you, but he's going to cut your head off in a few days. And that's exactly what happened, you know? It's exactly what happened. But nonetheless, he's a prisoner for something he didn't do, wrongfully convicted and wrongfully imprisoned. We've seen enough shows on 2020 and Dateline to see all these stories of people who are wrongly accused, wrongly convicted, and they're in prison, and some of them for years. And it changes them. In fact, there was a study that was done on people who were wrongly accused, wrongly convicted, and in prison, and the impact that that had on them. The number one thing, they said, in fact, this thing was the catalyst for all the other effects. The number one thing it said was they lost their identity. They lost sight of who they were before they were ever locked up. And that loss of identity impacted every other area of their life, from their marriages to their family, to their work, to their education, to everything else. And some of them actually went in as great upstanding citizens, and when they got out, took up a life of crime. Because it changed them. Circumstance, situation, something they didn't ask for, thrust upon them. And in Genesis 39, here's what it says about Joseph. But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. Really? Because up until this point, everything in this story sounds like God is nowhere near him. It feels like God has left him to brothers who hated him and wanted to kill him and sold him, left him abandoned into slavery, left him to the false accusations of a woman, and now have left him in prison because, hey, the guy, the cupbearer, when he gets out of prison, right, when he gets restored to Pharaoh, Jacob just says, hey, one thing I ask, just don't forget about me, tell him about me. And the cupbearer forgot about him, and for 2 years, he still sits in prison. What does that do to you? What does it do to you when you were overlooked and forgotten by someone you helped? By someone who got to where they are because of you, and they don't remember you. And they just overlooked you. So now you're used again. But it said, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness, granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So now the prison warden says there's something divine on this guy. Something's different. It goes on, it says, so the warden put Joseph in charge of all those he held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. Like I said, he goes on to interpret the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker. And the cupbearer goes back and forgets him, and now 2 more years he's in prison while the cupbearer's up there and just forgot all about him. What does it do to you when you feel forgotten and overlooked? Can I tell you, it's happening right now in our church. Right now, in the people I love, in the congregation that I call the church family, it happens. Because we've been locked away for like a year and a half, somewhat. Some of us, for this quarantine and all that, it's just been awful. And our staff has had to come up every single week trying to figure out, what do we do next? How do we do this next? We don't know what church is supposed to look like. We don't know if we get together. If we do get together, who's here, who's not, who's involved, who's not, where the volunteer. We're trying to figure all that stuff out. And meanwhile, there are people who have not been here. Some of you watching at home have not been here in months, maybe a year. And you're upset because you hadn't got called. And you're upset because you feel forgotten and overlooked by the very people that you helped. You volunteered and nobody's called. You gave, nobody's missed you. That's not the case. You are missed, but maybe like the cupbearer, you just got kind of sucked into all the work, just like the staff. We get sucked into all the work. Some of you have been in the hospital and you say, I was in the hospital for 4 weeks and nobody ever called me. And then the staff goes, I didn't even know you were in the hospital. Oh my gosh. And here we are sitting around the table, beating ourselves up, and we feel horrible and we feel terrible and we feel awful. Until all of a sudden your name pops up somewhere, and like that cupbearer, we're like, oh, crud. Doesn't matter, does it? See, Pharaoh has a dream that can't be interpreted, and the cupbearer overhears it, and he goes, oh, now I remember my mistake. I have neglected to remind you of this guy that's in prison that interprets dreams. And the staff, we feel that way. But what does it feel like on your end to be forgotten, overlooked? It feels like they don't love me. They don't care. And God must not care either, because I've sat in this hospital and nobody's reached out. And I've been locked at home, and nobody has expressed that they've missed me. Let me just tell you, I'm sorry, I apologize. But do not let your circumstance or your situation get the best of you. Don't let it get the best of you. You see, eventually when Pharaoh has this dream and the cupbearer remembers, and Joseph comes up and interprets the dream, and it's about a famine and all that. And then he says, hey, king, old Pharaoh, this is great. You've got this, dream, and God has given you insight not only to what's going to happen, but here's how you're going to be able to make it through. Here's how you need to prepare for the famine. Here's how you need to take the years where things are going to be really good and prepare for the years where things are going to be really bad. Where did Joseph learn all those skills? He learned them by managing Potiphar's house. He learned them by managing prisoners. He knew how to leverage resources. He was learning all the time about how to manage the resources of someone else, so that whenever he does have this opportunity, he's not just saving a nation, he is saving his own family, because they come crawling back, bowing down at his feet in need of food when the famine hits. You see, he goes from prison to a place of prestige and living in the palace. You say, man, that's awesome. 23 years from the pit until he got to the palace. 23 years of circumstances and situations saying God has forgotten you, God has left you, you are nobody, you're not important, your own family doesn't even love you or want you. 23 years, this is probably going on in his head and his heart and his mind. For 23 years, circumstances and situations, one after the other, were attempting to get the best of him and to change him. And Joseph, now that he's got the prestige, he's got the palace, he's got a royal coat on now, he could have let all of that go to his head and let that change him. Let the new situation, the new circumstance change him. Become lofty and haughty, right? He could have let all of that get the best of him. We're actually going to talk more about that next week. So I hope you come back for that. Here's the phrases I want you to just settle on. It says over and over in these situations, the Lord was with Joseph. Say that with me, okay? The Lord was with Joseph. Come on, say it again, even at home, all skate, come on. The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was also with Jacob. Because if you go back home, the situation is dire and it's depressing. And Jacob is an old, depressed man. Why? Because there's a famine in the land. And economic downturns hit rich people a lot harder than poor people. I know some of you poor people are going, what? That's not right. That's not fair, okay? But it's true. You got more property. You got more bills. You got more stuff. You got sometimes a payroll. You got other people to look at. Listen, when the economy started crashing around here in 2007 and 2008, that's when I came on board as the pastor. It was terrible in Atlanta and the suburbs. Wasn't so bad up here. It took a few years for it to get bad up here. Because all the people down there who owned second homes up here, right, when they stopped showing up, when they started selling off property, then we felt it. But some of you never felt it because you were never dependent on the stock market in the first place, right? I remember whenever we had our first back-to-school bash and we're giving out all the free stuff and the free school supplies, I remember walking the school bags with all the school supplies with a woman out to her Hummer. She'd never been in this position before, that she couldn't even buy school supplies for her own kids while she's driving the Hummer. Kind of did something to me when I heard that. Shared it with somebody else, and they say, I know her situation. The Hummer's paid for. They've lost their home and everything else. Wow. It's a nice car until you realize she's living in it. Man. Back home, it's dire. Jacob's got all of these animals. He's got all of this stuff. He's got all of these servants, and there's a famine, and he can't feed any of them. And he looks at his boys and says, hey, there's food in Egypt. Why are y'all sitting around here? Go get some food. He said they go back, and they find themselves at the feet of Joseph. They don't know it's him. He looks different, sounds different, different language and everything. He plays a little cat and mouse game with them for a little while. Finds out, wait a second, y'all have a father? He's still alive? You have whatever, and you have all this stuff. Wait, listen, I tell you what, I want you to go back. Right? And he plays a little game where he plants something in their luggage or whatever to make them look like they stole stuff. And he says, I want you to go back, but I want you to keep this one brother here. So he keeps a brother, Simeon. They go back home and they say, Dad, I don't know what happened, but when we were leaving, there was this like stuff in our bag, and we didn't really steal it, but he got mad, and so he kept Simeon. And they're like, no, you got to go back, right? And then they find out, wait, there's a younger brother. I'm number 11. Dad had number 12. Bring me number 12. So now they're back home and they're saying, Dad, he's got Simeon, but he wants us to bring little Benjamin back. And Jacob is so distraught. I'm in famine. We're starving. We're hungry. My favorite son is dead. Another son is held captive, and now they want my baby boy. It got the best of Jacob. Because here's what the scripture says came out of his mouth. Genesis 42 and 36. Everything is against me. This is the one who had the dream about God, doing something through him. This is the one who got the inheritance, the birthright. This is the one who got the blessing of his father. This is the one that God spoke to and said all this kind of stuff. This was the identity that he was going to have like this great nation, and the world was going to be blessed through his descendants. And here he is. The situation is so bad and it's so depressing. He says, everything is against me. But the truth is, the Lord was with Jacob. And the truth is, the Lord's with you too. Come on, say it with me. The Lord is with me. And he's not just with you, he's for you. Don't let your circumstance and your situation get the best of you. Don't let it define you. Don't let it change you. You focus on this, and this tells you who you are. You are the one that God is with. You are the one that God loves. You are the one that God is for. That's who you are. This is the final thought to leave you with. You don't have to see God in the situation in order to reflect God in the situation. You are made in the image of God, the creator of the universe. You are made, listen, to conform to the likeness of Jesus Christ, his son, the perfect human being that loved so many, that was able to do so good for so many. That is who you are. You were made to reflect him and made to emulate him. And that defines you, the son and the daughter of God, an heir of all of his promises with Jesus Christ. That's what it says. You don't have to see God in your situation in order for you to reflect God in your situation. Because Joseph might have thought that God abandoned him, but Potiphar said, there's a touch of God on him. All the prisoners may have thought, yep, God has abandoned you. But the warden said there's something special about that one. You don't have to see it in order to reflect it. Listen, some of you, there's people I know. My father-in-law is battling cancer. And people will ask whenever you get cancer, why does God let something so bad happen to someone so good? Jay and Candy LaPointe attend our church. Candy, she has tumors in her brain cancer, and then she got COVID, and she's in the hospital. And unless God does a supernatural, blow your mind miracle, she's in her final days. Final days. And twice this week, someone has asked me the similar question, Jay, her husband, being one of them. Why does God let something so bad happen to someone so good? And I'm like, Jay, don't let the circumstance or the situation get the best of you. It doesn't define you. Don't let it redefine you. Don't let it change what you believe about God and what you think God believes about you. Don't do it. We're in a broken world. It is a mess. I told him, I said, if you were to walk into the Garden of Eden and everything is just perfect and you saw a piece of trash on the ground, you would go, how in the world did this get in here? We're not in the garden. We're in the garbage pail. And so whenever anything good happens in this life, we ought to pick it up and go, oh, praise God, how in the world did this get in here? And Joseph's in prison, and the favor of God's on him. He's like, man, how in the world did that get in here? He's in slavery. He's like, how in the world did the hand of God get in here? He's in the pit. How in the world did the hand of God get in here? But when his brothers figure out who he is and they're scared to death, he said, don't worry, I'm not retaliating. What you meant for evil, God meant for good. His hand was in every circumstance and every situation. Don't let yours redefine you. Listen, as we do communion today, the chairs there in front of you, you'll see the little cups. There's a little thin piece of plastic on the top, okay? For those of you doing this, the little thin piece of plastic, it'll get you to the bread. And then there's this foil thing that'll get you to the juice. And if you're sitting on the front rows in that second section back there, they're going to bring it to you. But just think of this, okay? This is what Jesus said. This is the reminder of my broken body and my spilled blood on the cross. Remember this? Come on. Those of you who know the story, if you've not heard it, just pay attention, okay? Listen, when Jesus is on the cross, he cries out and he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why did you leave me? Why have you turned your back on me? And there's been a lot of pastors and theologians that say that God turned his back on his son. I don't believe for a minute God ever turned his back on his son. What I believe is that Jesus was quoting from the psalmist David, who actually wrote, my God, why have you forsaken me? I am surrounded by my enemies. They're like dogs who are waiting to devour me. I think Jesus was pointing back to David. You know, David, the king, the one who killed the giant, the one that God loved. I think what he's saying is we all know what it's like to be in circumstances and situations that feel like God has left us. Don't let it get the best of you. And here's Jesus on the cross. And you can't see God's presence. And you don't feel God's touch. And in that moment, there's not a single follower that's left. Well, John's down there at the bottom, his mother and a couple of ladies, and all of them are wondering too why God has left his own son. But when he could not see God's presence, he reflected God's heart. And he said, John, take care of my mama like she's yours.